I am especially thrilled to be here at William Patterson, where you not only talk the talk but walk the walk on sustainability. So, kudos to all of you for supporting an administration that actually tries to set an example in the positive things about what we can do to address the climate crisis. And that is what I'm here today to talk to you about. I'm here today to talk to you about climate change. I believe personally that climate change is the greatest challenge that any of us will face in our lifetime. I believe if we don't put the brakes on soon, the crash that we will have with our natural world is going to be catastrophic for us. I think the world will survive. I think it's questionable about us, but that's a whole, another down the road. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you through a slideshow that was developed in large part by the Climate Reality Project with some input from Climate Mama, and that looks at extreme weather and climate change. It looks at how we got to where we're at, what we're seeing in terms of the impacts of climate change. And then we're going to take a look at some of the solutions and the positive ways that we, both as individuals and as a community, can deal with some of these things, because it really is a huge, big issue and so hard to get our arms around. And I'm excited to hear Bryan's presentation at the end. So we're going to go through this one and then look at his very personal experience, up close and personal, with climate change in his community. Briefly, a little bit about me, why I'm here. I wear many different hats. I have worked most of my professional life as a policy analyst and an economist. I spent 13 years with the International Monetary Fund at the United Nations and got to travel the world and work on a lot of climate issues from a very international perspective. I am not with the fund anymore. I'm trying to be more local in my work. I established Climate Mama about 3 years ago and am working in my community here. And I live out here in North Jersey where I chair my town's environmental commission and green team and get to really see hands-on how people see and perceive climate change. So it's a little bit about me. I'm doing all of this really also because I'm a mom and I really care about my children's future. And I have to say that the more I learn about climate change and the more I understand about the crisis that we are currently in, the more I really feel it's my job as a parent to my two children who are here, Elliot and Alana. It's my job to help you understand more about climate change too. So if just one of you can help figure out a solution in your community or your family and talk to some of your friends, I feel I've accomplished what I set out to do. So whether there's 7 of us in the room or 700, it's really the individuals that are here and that can really personally make a difference. So I want to start now and have you hear, in the words of our neighboring governor, what climate change means to us.
Nothing could have prepared you for what happened on October 29th. I was in the office until late that evening. The storm had started, and I decided to take a ride around the town to see how it was actually affecting Manhattan. And we went down the east side of Manhattan, which is bordered by the East River. And something I'd never seen before, the East River had come over the banks and had come further west than First Avenue, hundreds and hundreds of feet beyond the banks. We got to the tip of Manhattan, the battery of Manhattan, and literally it was underwater. I mean, it was literally underwater. The East River had come up and the Hudson River had come up and it was underwater. We went up a little further to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel and saw a river of water rushing into the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. I was at the 9/11 site and I was watching it fill with water from the Hudson River, a waterfall just filling the foundation of the World Trade Center. And the unimaginable was actually happening. And I remembered that I had seen this before. And Al Gore, in An Inconvenient Truth, actually spoke about the Hudson River filling up the World Trade Center site. And I remembered how implausible it sounded, how horrific when he talked about it. And here I was watching it just a few years later. He was right. He was right. $30 billion in damage to the state. We've lost weeks of economic activity. Storms last year ravaged upstate New York, Storm Irene and Storm Lee. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars in damage and lives turned upside down. Anyone who says this is just 1 in a million, anyone who says this is a fluke and it won't happen again, is denying reality. This is the new reality. This is the new normal. It's something we have to plan on. It will happen again, and we have to be prepared.
When Greg and I started giving these climate talks almost 7 years ago, which is so hard to believe, we had in our slideshow that graphic of that demonstration of the World Trade Center site flooding. And it is truly amazing that we are living that now. And we actually took it out of the slideshow because people were, that could never happen. Here is Governor Cuomo putting it back in. So, you know, we need to have our politicians behind us. We lived that. Most of us, I'm sure, in the room, many of you were here for Superstorm Sandy, and we have to have the political will to move forward on solving things. So that's Governor Cuomo. I know Governor Christie is working really hard to help us rebuild the shore, but when it comes to addressing and speaking about climate change, you know, he hedges his bets a little bit, and it's not something that is discussed as questionable anywhere else in the world except here in the United States, where you have, you know, at a political level, debating the reality of climate change. It is real, it's now, it's here, it's happening. And I'd like to take you on a bit of a world tour to have a look at some of the events and experiences and examples of climate change as we've seen them. So we not only had Superstorm Sandy, we had Tropical Storm Irene the year before. And the costs of climate change to us as a nation, as an international community and locally, are very real. And so those external costs that become very real, internalized for all of us, need also to be factored in when we talk about how we're going to address climate change now and not leave it for, you know, us to deal with 10 years, 20 years down the road. These are some iconic photos from our recent brush with our changing climate. This is Seaside Heights. Before and after the Manahawkin Bridge that if you visit the Jersey Shore, you've probably driven over many times, well, not anymore. Halloween. I have now a 13 and a 15-year-old, but they still like to go out with their friends for Halloween. 2 years ago, Halloween in my New Jersey community was canceled. We were told not to send kids out on the streets because it was too dangerous. This year, 2012, same thing. Halloween canceled because of our experience with Superstorm Sandy. These two photos are within half a block of my home in northern Jersey. This is my friend's car as they pulled up to stay at my house because they were without power for close to 2 weeks. So this is a reality that we're living with here in New Jersey. Let's look at this reality in some other places around the planet. So we're going to take a look over the last 3 years at climate change. This is Pakistan in 2010, where flooding impacted over 20 million people, further destabilizing a nuclear-armed country. This is Australia 2 years ago, January 2011, where flooding, again, impacted an area larger in size than the countries of Germany and France combined. So this impacted people's homes, their place of business, their livelihood. And again, it's not something that's easy to recover from, maybe easier in developed countries like Australia or here where we live than in countries like Pakistan. This is just last year, Australia. This is China this past summer. The year before, where over 13 million people 8.5 million people, 13 provinces were impacted by flooding. This is North Korea this summer and the summer before. In Seoul, where flooding from storms reached the 4th floor of this high-rise building. This is India, Costa Rica. Again, so it's all over the world. Global warming is called global warming because it's global. And again, we have short media cycles and we forget things that happen. Sometimes we have to be reminded. You remember less than a year ago where, again, millions of people were without power because of crazy storms that hit here and in the eastern part of the United States. This is Hurricane Irene and damage that it's done and did to roads in Killington, Vermont. And this is the governor of Vermont, where he's reminding us, Vermont didn't used to have storms like this. So this extreme weather that we are witnessing around our planet and here in our own country isn't something that's normal. As Governor Cuomo said, this is the new normal. So how come there's so many more bigger storms and downpours throughout the world? When we started giving these presentations 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we were told we had to be very careful and not talk about any one storm in relation to climate change. And now scientists are telling us, this is Kevin Trenberth, telling us that we have to, when we talk about storms, we have to consider how all storms are changed because of conditions related to climate change. How does it impact us? We talked briefly about, or I mentioned the costs as well. Munich Re is the second largest reinsurance company in the world. How are they considering and factoring in when you get your car insurance, your home insurance, what it's going to cost because of what they're paying for damages that are being experienced around the world because of climate change? And again, it's not something that's scientists are modeling or that we're looking at in a lab or we're looking at studies. This is real, it's reality, we're experiencing it, we're seeing it. Nature is showing us how it's happening. This is Jim Hansen, and you may have heard, retired from NASA just this week, and what he's talking about the serious fires and heat waves that happen in Europe. This is climate change here where we live in New Jersey. Here in the Northeast. Annual temperatures have gone up almost 2 degrees. Our winters are warming faster. Snowpack and ice are decreasing. Our indicators of spring, even though we've had a cold spring this year, if you're an allergy sufferer, you've been suffering for a long time already with tree pollen, so things are changing. Extreme heat in the summer, so health impacts of climate change. Asthma, poison ivy, allergies, things, vector-borne diseases, all of those are now being studied and discussed in terms and relations to our changing climate. And so we have to connect the dots between all of these things and recognize that they are all related.
One of the changes we've seen is that the average humidity of our planet has increased by 4%. Warmer air holds more water vapor. And so on average, our atmosphere is 4% more humid than it used to be 30 or 40 years ago. So when storms come through, there's more water for them to pick up and dump.
So let's look at why, again, we're having these extreme weather events. When it rains, why does it seem to dump so much more rain? Or when we get snowstorms, why do we get so much more snow when it happens? So let's look at that linkage between the climate crisis and the severity and intensity of our weather. As carbon dioxide increases, so too does temperature. Now, scientists have been looking at measuring this dating back over 800,000 years, and they can see, and this is where we have a table downstairs for 350, an organization where the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere hasn't increased. It's stayed within a band more above 280 parts per million. Now, a part per million might seem very tiny and very small, but we see really significant changes as those get above 350 parts per million. We are close to 400 parts per million. And we see as that CO2 goes up, so does temperature. How do we increase the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and what is it doing? We do it when we burn fossil fuels. We do it when we put the lights on in our homes and our factories. We do it when we mine and extract the energy that we're using. We do it through large-scale agricultural production. All of these things contribute greenhouse gases, which carbon dioxide is a major greenhouse gas, to our atmosphere. And what that does, it creates kind of like a blanket around our globe. So we're trapping heat that otherwise would have been reflected back out into space, where it keeps us at a very toasty temperature, that's hospitable to us as humans and to everything that lives here. We're holding in more of that heat. And so that energy balance, keeping us in balance, is getting out of whack. So as the temperature gets warmer, more moisture evaporates from the oceans into the sky. And we're seeing, as global temperatures go up, and we're also seeing the precipitation go up. I'm sure that all of you studied the hydrological cycle at some point, in middle school or something, and we all know that with evaporation then comes precipitation. It goes back into our rivers and seas, and again, it's in balance. We're taking that out of balance by what we're doing with increasing the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So the number and increase in heavy precipitation days are correlated to those increases in temperature. So what are we doing? We're, again, and I'm just repeating this a few times so that we can see and understand that correlation. As we get more evaporation from the ocean, because the atmosphere is warmer, the air holds more moisture, and then when it comes down in big heavy downpours. And because our air is warmer, that snowpack that we would get doesn't last as long, it melts quicker. We get more flooding in the springtime, but there's less in the summer. And then we get drought areas that are hardened, and then they get heavy downpours, and instead of that water getting absorbed into the ground, it runs off more quickly, and it makes droughts that happen quicker, last longer. We have been in drought conditions. Over 60% of our country has been in drought over the last year. We have over 50% currently of our country in extreme to severe drought conditions. So again, these are what scientists are telling us, markers of our changing climate that we are causing by increasing the amount of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So again, it's that correlation to what we're doing, that it's caused by humans, that we have to make and connect the dots. So again, as that water is absorbed through the oceans, the same thing happens as that moisture is sucked out of the land, and we get those drought conditions happening too. With drought, so we looked at all that flooding situation around the world, extreme weather. Other parts in other areas in the same countries even are experiencing extreme drought. And with drought comes fire. This is Russia, and this drought and fires in Russia resulted in over 56,000 people losing their lives through this period in Russia. And this is the former president of Russia after this saying, we need to wake up. This should be inciting our leaders. This should be something that is making all of us stand up and say, this is not okay. I don't know if you saw pictures or saw, there was corn literally popping on the cob, on the stalk this past summer here in the United States. This is in Illinois, where this farmer said it really was like farming in hell. This is drought conditions as of last summer. And again, if we look at the red is extreme drought conditions, and the dark red is exceptional drought conditions. We are still in that situation here in the United States. This is the global drought last year, where almost 750,000 people were affected by exceptional drought conditions. So this is reality. And again, we have such fast media cycles here. We see things and it goes out of our mind. We have to keep those things and connect those dots between what's happening. With drought and with extreme heat also comes fire. So again, last summer and last year, we really saw a lot of evidence of terrible fires across our country. This is in Oklahoma.
In the hills above Colorado Springs, a raging inferno devouring home after home. 1,000 firefighters overwhelmed, what they call a firestorm of epic proportions.
It's as bad as it gets out there right now. Door to door, street by street. Firefighters inside, outside, trying to keep the flames away from buildings.
With winds whipping at 65 miles an hour, flames exploded past fire breaks.
It jumped 2 ridges, and it moved 3 miles in less than an hour.
The governor toured from the air and said it looked like a movie set.
Well, we don't have time to get into it now, but a lot of the fires in Colorado, they are exacerbated by something called the pine beetle, the western pine beetle, and the damage that it did in killing a lot of the forests. We have billions of trees out in California, Idaho, British Columbia, Alberta, the West. You can go to some places and it is decimated. I was out there these past 2 summers. It's really overwhelming to look at the dead and dying trees out there, and unless you go there to see it. But when that happens, and then when there's these really dry conditions, the potential for fire is that much more extreme. So again, these are just more pictures of what we heard and saw about last summer in Colorado. Now again, another byproduct of dry conditions, fire, drought, and dust storms. Now Phoenix gets these dust storms, but this is, again, like the dust storm that swallowed Phoenix. It's a time-elapse photo, but they're getting more of these. They would get them occasionally. These are happening on a much more regular basis. So again, crazy things to see and think about. And again, part of, in dry conditions, when we use, how we use our water and how we irrigate, and that is something that also has to be taken into the picture if we want to be sustaining and making sure that we have food, even in these changing climate conditions, that we can grow the necessary crops and food for all of us to be able to sustain us. So this is reality. These are actually, this is happening now. This is in our country. This is happening around the world. And why aren't we doing more about it? Well, there is this whole machinery, especially here in the United States. And as I alluded to and said in the beginning, we don't hear those same complaints or discussion actually at all in other parts of the world like we do here. We've allowed this denial machinery to have an equal voice, or maybe in some cases a larger voice than those many, many voices on the side telling us and showing us reality. So let's look at that. No scientific consensus. In fact, every major National Academy of Science around the world tells us that anthropogenic, that means human-caused climate change, is real and it's happening. How many tell us it's not happening? There are none. 0. The National Academies of Science, this is what they said to the G8 plus 5. That's the 8 largest economies plus 5 in the world. This is real, it's happening, it's now, and we're causing it. 97 to 98%. You don't get those kind of percentages in science. Science isn't so absolute. 98% of climate scientists working in the field, because again, that's who you want to listen to, people that are working in the field telling us that climate change is real, it's happening, and it's now. Yet we allow the media to put that 97% or 98% and that 1 or 2 or 3 scientists on this side and give them equal voice in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in magazines and periodicals and newspapers that we trust. That isn't okay, and that needs to be conveyed to our media as well too, because that, if you go to a doctor and you hear that you are very sick and you keep going and going and going, and 97 doctors tell you you're really sick, but if you do this, you're going to get better. And you have 1 doctor or 2 doctors on this side that say, well, let's see what happens. It's our planet, we're playing with our future. Again, just crazy high temperatures that are, haven't been reached before. This is last summer, and if you notice, the runways melted. This plane was stopped on the runway in Washington, D.C. This is in Connecticut, near us, in late August or middle of August, where they had to shut down the reactor because the Long Island Sound temperatures were too hot. This is from the Bergen record on the first day of spring here. So even though it feels like it's been really cold, and I'm certainly ready for spring, I know that my family feels that way too. On average, we're already 2 degrees above normal. This is the first leaf in New Jersey. Since the 1970s, they're coming 3 days earlier nationally and 5 days earlier here. Seasons are changing. Gardeners are recognizing those changes. Allergy sufferers, again, that whole spring season, it's spreading out, spring and fall on both sides. You know, we can look back because we have people like Thoreau who did studies, very close studies on plant species back many years ago, and they can show us when those plants were flowering, and now we see they're flowering much earlier. So things are changing very, very quickly. The 10 hottest years on record, the hottest year on record, statistically tied with 2005. Now these are since we've been keeping records since the late 1800s. But you know, we continue to hear that it must be something else. It can't be that 90 million tons of greenhouse gas pollution we're putting into the air. And now when I talk to kids and I tell them 90 million tons, they're like, how do you put an image around that? That's kind of, you know, it's this equivalent what I tell them, and it helps me visualize it, to 23 million elephants disappearing every day in the sky. Where's it going? And it's going nowhere and not doing any harm.
Cigarette, doctor? Thanks, doctor.
A lot of the same, it's interesting, some of the same ad agencies that developed those ad campaigns for cigarette companies back in the 60s and 70s are developing the ads for the fossil fuel industries today. So again, when you see a commercial talking about the benefits of clean natural gas, remember it's a commercial and it's developed by an ad agency. This is the CEO of ExxonMobil telling us that we can, you know, be educated to understand how we can manage these risks, and that we'll figure out how to adapt to it. I think Bryan's going to tell us how easy or not it is to actually adapt to these things. I know Jerome just did a whole thing on fracking, so I'm going to go through this really quickly, but it's an issue you need to be educated on here in the Northeast, and we need to understand better what's going on around us, because it's locking us into an energy source, which is a fossil fuel, that is stopping us from moving forward into renewable energies as we invest in the whole infrastructure that supports this industry. So we have to understand what we're getting ourselves into. Again, shale gas, which is where the fracked gas comes out of, is where that increase is happening and where that danger is in terms of health impacts, methane leaks, and climate impacts. How is the U.S. getting its energy? We just last year tied with coal. We're getting rid of coal, which is very dirty, very polluting, but we're replacing it with natural gas. And in the short term, you know, is that the right answer? But what are the longer term implications? It may be just enough to push us over that climate cliff, because with methane, which is natural gas, it's 23 times more potent in the short term, in that first 20 years, than carbon dioxide. And if that is what we're so close to the edge, scientists are telling us, it may be what sends us over that, that climate cliff. So we need to think about those things. How quickly is this expanding, this industry? So these are conventional wells, the black. Look at what's happening just since 2005. Those are all conventional gas wells in Pennsylvania. The red, you're going to start seeing red dots come in late 2007. Red is fracking gas, fracked gas wells. Look at the proliferation of fracking in such a short period of time. It's not being well monitored by industry or by government, how quickly it is coming on stream. We need to be worried about that, or raise attention to that fact and figure that out. Right now, we have few liquefied natural gas plants to send it overseas. The price is so depressed of natural gas, which we all benefit from in terms of if we use gas to heat our homes, but those companies are just not making any money, and they're looking at ways through pipelines, as Jerome talked about, to get that gas through New Jersey to the coast and send it overseas, where it will command 3 to 4 times as much money as it does here. So when you hear that, you know, mantra that this is giving us energy security, don't believe it, question it. Again, where is that water that we are pulling out of the hydrological cycle that we talked about before? Where is it going? Once it's contaminated and goes into fracked wells, it is not something that can be reused again. Jerome went over this, so I'm not going to, we'll go through these slides quickly. But here, this is a pit where some of that wastewater that we were talking about is actually going in Pennsylvania. How safe is that? What happens with the next hurricane that comes by and extreme weather events, and it washes out and gets into the surrounding land and into your aquifer or into your well? So this is the safety procedures. This is what's happening. This is on site happening next door to us, and they want to bring it here to treat it in New Jersey. This is just up here at Ramapo College. We did a walk to raise attention to a gas pipeline that is going through. Again, right near here in West Milford, these are photos of pipeline projects that are happening now, and trying to raise attention outside some of our local representatives, because in New Jersey, we passed a ban on the acceptance of fracking waste and transport of fracking waste, and it was vetoed by the governor. It was passed by bipartisan support, and we are trying to raise attention to get that overturned, because until and if we can ever figure out a way to treat it, we first need to know what's in it. There's no reason that we should be having to accept what industry can't deal with in the next state over. We know fossil fuels create environmental disasters. We go to war fighting to support this source of energy. This is not our future, and we really need to change and figure out where we're going. And we do have solutions at hand. Some of you may know the story of this 14-year-old boy. He has a book called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. He lives in Malawi, one of the poorest countries in the world. He built a windmill to power his home and then windmills to power his village. And certainly if a 14-year-old boy in one of the poorest countries in the world can solve his energy crisis, we should be able to solve our energy crisis. Here's some happy facts, perhaps, projections on renewable energy and where we're projected to be at and where we actually are and have achieved. This is on wind power. So again, how do projections live up to reality? This is worldwide wind capacity. We've exceeded our projections by a factor of 7. And China's doing everything, right? I mean, China is using every form of energy. It's growing so incredibly fast, but it is also, moving forward at lightning speed in renewables, as well as the same time as it puts coal plants on steam and on track as well. This is the solar market. Where's reality in solar? Again, all positive. So when you hear this, that we can't do it with renewables, we haven't moved forward, though that is, again, a media spin, and you have to get to the reality and get to the truth on what is happening and the potential that we have to actually move forward. There was a report that came out about 3 weeks ago done by some eminent scientists looking at New York State and powering by 2030 New York 100% renewables and showing how it can be done with existing technology. So again, we can do this. We can have renewable energy. We can move forward with renewables in a very positive way. So to say that we have to use natural gas and to invest in the infrastructure that supports it is not a direction we have to go unless we allow industry to push us and our political system that way. So again, costs are going down. The technology is there, the current technology that we can use. We are getting rid of some of the dirtier forms of fossil fuels through legislation and public pressure and support. We can do the same with other forms of fossil fuel. The Vatican, which has got a lot of attention lately, has sworn to be the first country to be carbon neutral. Well, it's a very small country, but it's a very powerful one. And we see countries all over the world that are just jump-starting the fossil fuels. They are moving forward with solar as a way to help move forward. What can you do? Really quickly, we have to speak out. You have to speak out for the truth. You have to find your area, whatever your cause is, involve your friends and family, act out for the planet, every chance that you can. Simple things, because personal actions help us make those harder choices and harder decisions as we move forward as well. Reach others, stand up and tell the truth, and certainly, find your own reality and your facts. The reality is the same. There's many places to find the facts. And don't just listen, I have this to say, but you can, find those peer-reviewed studies. Don't allow those people that present that denialism to be the ones that win the conversation. Speak louder than they do. Bring your friends, it's fun. If you want to take it to that extreme, we don't all have to get arrested, but it was a really incredible, uplifting experience actually for me when I got arrested 2 years ago in Washington, D.C., protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. But it's not for everybody. Everybody has to take different actions. Martin Luther King said the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. I think we're standing in the midst of those times now, and we need to do something and make a difference.
Your wallet, your bank account. You keep a close eye on them. You pay for your groceries. You pay for your car. You pay for your stuff. You pay for your roads, your schools, the things we all share. You know what else you're paying for? Carbon pollution. Oh yes, you're paying for carbon. Science tells us carbon pollution is the leading cause of climate disruption. Burning of dirty is raising its temperature, which makes and weather more. Result?
12 with United States weather started.
I'm not sure why it's not working. It's a good way to end it because it really gives you, we really need to put a price on what we're doing and understand that what we're doing, we're allowing people to, and ourselves included, be sucked in that carbon pollution that we're producing has no cost to it. It has a huge cost. It has a cost to our environment. It has a cost to our future. It has a health cost to it. It adds cost to our lives in so many ways, shapes, and forms. So the people that try to tell you it's a choice between the environment or the economy, it's a false choice because they're very, very closely connected and it's all the same choice. And so we really need to understand that we need to value that and recognize how we have to connect the dots and pull this all together. So one way and one solution that people like to, that's being discussed now is we should put a price on carbon. We should make polluters pay because we're allowing our atmosphere to be used as an open sewer, literally, and not just figuratively, really literally. And that is causing our world to change. And so that is something you'll hear more and more about moving forward because it's something that is seen as attractive politically. What you do with the money that you collect is a whole nother story. But let's start putting a price on carbon and taking away the subsidies that we're giving to oil and gas companies who make billions of dollars every month and let clean energy have its fair share and opportunity to really grow and be part of our future. And so I'm going to stop there, and I want to, you may already know Bryan, who is a student here at William Patterson, but he has a very personal story about how climate change has impacted his life directly, and he is going to share that with you now. So I'm going to pull up his slides. Maybe you want to introduce yourself, though, Bryan, while I pull it up and tell everybody what they're going to see.
Well, my name is Bryan. Let me stand over here. I'm a junior here at William Patterson University, majoring in environmental science. There it is. Again. I come from a country in South America called Bolivia. It's a landlocked country, and one of the things about landlocked country is that you begin to learn the importance of water. We're surrounded by continents. We used to have access to the water, but we lost it in some wars. Now, Bolivia is the poorest country in South America, unfortunately. Poor, I say, because economically we're not doing well, but we're rich in culture. The majority of the population in Bolivia is indigenous. And one thing about indigenous people is that they're very connected with the environment, very connected. Now, where I come from was affected greatly by climate change because of a glacier that was known as Chacaltaya Mountain. Now, Chacaltaya Mountain was once known as the world's highest ski resort. People from all over the world used to come and ski, snowboard. I've gone there, visited a couple of times, as the city, the small little, I guess you can't really call it a city. It was a population of less than 500 where my parents came from, lived there. I have a couple pictures of it now. Used to be the world's highest ski resort, the first ever motorized ski lift in South America. This was it in 1980. This building here was the first building built at that altitude at that time. And it took you, later on in that year, it took you all the way to the top where you can go down and ski. There was it. And you can't really see it too well, but a lot of this glacier runoff used to come down to the streams here, feeding the lower cities, or pueblos as we call them in South America, where my parents came from. Again, in 2005. Now, little by little, the indigenous people started realizing, and I myself saw firsthand, that there was more patches of gray coming on the mountain, higher and higher, almost as if it was receding. But again, indigenous people, we like to connect with the earth. We more believe in the power of Mother Earth, which in Quechua, which is the native language where I come from, it's not like Spanish, it's not like any Portuguese, it's more of a dialect. And it's one that's dying out too. They call it Pachamama, which in English it would be closely related to Mother Earth. And this was in 2005, still active. Now before I get into the picture, which I'm sure a lot of you know the end story of it, on one of my trips to Bolivia, going back, I had to go get a yellow fever shot, which was never before required to go to Bolivia because we're at such high altitudes. In the city of La Paz, where I'm from, there was never any type of diseases such as West Nile or the yellow fever or dengue, which is now coming up there. The cities were too high for these mosquitoes and diseases to come. But now, because of warming temperatures, they're able to thrive up there. So on my way to a doctor, I go and I get my shot. And one of the questions on the application was, what is your intention in Bolivia? And I told him, well, I was going back as a student to kind of see the effects of climate change. And of course, the doctor went off and told me it was a hoax, and there was the biggest lie that's ever been perpetrated on the American people. And well, I didn't want to debate. I wasn't a doctor, and at that time, I didn't have my facts straight in order to get into a debate with this person. And plus, I just wanted my shot to get going. We'll come back to that story.
Where did you get your shot? Here or in Bolivia?
Here, yeah. So, on my way back to Chacaltaya, this is what it is present day. The world's highest ski resort is now a cemetery. The slopes that the skiers used to go down, gone. The highest motorized cable cart, useless now. Remember that picture in 1980? Today. I keep that house there in the picture because a lot of people think, oh, well, if you take a picture of one side of the mountain, the other isn't going to look the same. But no, that's the same house. And we even tried to recreate the car. Yeah, it sucks. But the point is not that we can't go skiing now, or snowboarding, or sledding in the highest mountain. It's what's below. It used to be a vast river of glacial flow, fresh water. Because essentially that's what they are. These high glaciers are reservoirs of fresh water that feed the lower lands of my country, Bolivia, which is a landlocked country. We don't get water from anywhere else. And it's the same all around the Andes Mountains, Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Chile. It used to be wider. You can't really tell with this picture, but it used to be wider. Now it's just a bunch of mud. Come down, we have a couple ponds here filled with just water, but not enough to sustain a city. Farther down in this kind of depleted, this area is the city of La Paz, because La Paz is inside one of the valleys. But the village where my parents came from was close, very close to this, and it was affected. You really don't realize the importance of water once you don't have it. The sister mountain, Zongo, which a lot of the people from Chacaltaya moved to because they needed fresh water for livestock, agriculture, to drink, sanitation. they moved on to the Zongo, which is on the other side. Current pictures of it today. Now, Bolivia, like a lot of countries in South America, depend on hydroelectricity. So we have the hydroelectricity dam right here. And years ago, before areas like this were inhabited, this glacier used to reach down here. Now it reaches right here to this area, which we're going to zoom up to right now. In 2004, the glacier used to touch this small area here, the small, I guess you could say, lake here. And now it's beginning to recede in a matter of 4 years. The effect may seem gradual for countries, developed countries like the United States, but in countries, in underdeveloped countries like Bolivia and a lot of other ones in South America, it's happening very quick. And if you look at the time frame of the world, and the whole time that the world was created, it's happening really quick. Now, this was put together to kind of show the effects and how they lead into one another. You have climate change, which is a positive forcing on glacial melt. Glacial melt will add to will take away from the water availability. And then you have economic prosperity. Instead of improving your country, instead of investing in your country, in your economy, which is what we've been trying to do, now you have to worry about saving the people. Now you have to worry about fresh water resources, where you're going to get your electricity from. And that comes down to migration. Or we can go, water availability also affects food supply. You need the water to raise livestock. You need the water to raise crops. We go down to migration, one of the reasons why I'm here today. Not to escape from Bolivia, but one of my goals is to receive an education in environmental science, not to try to combat it head on, but to raise awareness. Because as one person I know, I can't take this on my own. And not in my lifetime will I see a change, a 180 change on climate change. But I feel like if I could influence or make awareness grow in countries, especially to the indigenous people that still don't have an answer as to why this is happening, I feel like in the numbers, something can, a movement can happen. Migration, regional, like you saw at Chacaltaya, people are moving to Zongo, therefore putting more pressure on their water source, and therefore their glacial melt will run out faster. And internal tension will grow. Bolivia has seen a water war once, when an American company came in and tried to privatize our water. The indigenous people rose up and kicked a really strong American company out, forcefully, and it wasn't pretty. A lot of people did die on the Bolivian side. There also was a time where the United States intervened and tried to eradicate the coca leaf, which is the most sacred leaf to the indigenous people. They rose up again, and they stood and they fought, and again, a lot of people died. But they won. They kicked out the American embassy there, and they took over what was theirs. But now the indigenous people are faced with something that's a little different, that's out of their hands. For the water supply, as I told you, feeds the indigenous communities: forestry, agriculture, livestock, mining activities, hydroelectric power, and tourist activities, well, there was with the ski resort, and then water consumption for many cities, Quito, La Paz, and Lima. And glacial melt, especially in the tropical glaciers, which I know tropical glacier does sound like an oxymoron, but they do provide in a huge amount of water to the areas along the equator. Those are already very vulnerable. Natural variability, strong competition for water rights, economic growth and farming expansion, poverty, pollution, lack of environmental concern, and most of all, population growth. The more people in one area, the more demand. Unfortunately, the Andean countries do not have control over their own future in this regard. Climate change is a global problem, so even if Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru were to transform themselves into models of renewable energy production, they would be affected by the carbon dioxide emissions of countries halfway around the world. Industrialized countries in North America, Europe, and as well as developing countries with a large population such as India and China will have to shape their own policies to curb carbon emissions. The longer the world waits before confronting global climate change, the more people downstream of the Andean glaciers will suffer the consequences. Now, back to that doctor. I remember once seeing all this, and once I got a better grasp of what was happening, I thought, well, you know, the doctor's pretty well off. But if his job was affected, or if his life was affected because he couldn't drink water from his faucet, or if he had no money from what his job he was doing to put gas in his car and his Lexus or whatever he had, if his life was dramatically changed by this, then he would stand up and do something about it. But like I said before, here in the United States, we're not feeling the effects of it as hard as we are in these countries. When it gets hot here, we just blast on the AC. When a storm comes and affects our drinking water, we run to the supermarkets and buy bottled water. Third world countries, we don't have that amenity. When it gets hot, we run for the shades, or we jump into those lakes and rivers straight off glacial melt. Or when there is no water, what do? We've never been faced with this type of problems before. So the educating as what they can do, building of reservoirs, building of dams, or moving, or building of trenches to move water to other places is just a temporary. We need to make a positive change around the world. A lot of people move from despair and they just go into, well, we can't do anything. It's just too big of a problem. But if you stop in the intermediate step and think about, hey, what can I do? Or how can I influence people to make a change? That's the only way that things are gonna happen. I go back to Bolivia every now and then. I try to go every once a year when I can. And everything I learn here, I try to translate over there. This presentation, I'd love to give it. Well, this is just a small because of time, but I have a bigger presentation that I'd like to start giving over there, to start influencing people to making a change. And I've had great professors here, William Patterson, Dr. Pardee being one of them, who have taught me the importance of all these resources. We now know that these resources aren't finite. They will run out. And unless something is done soon, we're going to feel those effects here in the United States. The jolt has already shocked us in South America, and when it hits here, we'll make a difference. But by then, I hope it's not too late. You know, we can still save other glaciers around the world. We can still save the ice sheets, Antarctica and Greenland. It's just a matter of doing it and becoming educated. And people like Greg and Harriet are doing a great job in doing that. And that's it. Thank you very much.